9th at 4 o'clock. And tonight, the primary focus is budget, and more budget. Everything you wanted about budget.
And you get budget all day Friday, or not all day.
Oh, we're so excited, Clint. And Phil, who loves numbers, thank you, Phil. He's the chair of our FAB. He is here
You're welcome.
to talk about the budget.
I don't know if I love that numbers that much, but
But you know how to read them.
yes.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. It's a budget session, and then we'll talk about workforce housing requirements. And then I sent out a note to my colleagues last night about sister cities, and we'll talk briefly about sister cities. And we should finish by 6, right?
Easy. I mean, yeah, for the budget discussion, I'll just jump into it. Phil's here tonight for the FAB to kind of go over their report. We were going to hope, as staff, we were hoping to kind of touch on just a couple big picture issues today, knowing that we've got 4 hours scheduled on Friday to get into the weeds. Before we got into the weeds, I wanted to make sure that there wasn't any global issues after Phil's done talking that you didn't want to touch. So the budget tonight is really going to be driven by you all, make sure you got a level of comfort. And then after that, we'll get into the housing regulations and see how those fly.
Sounds very fair. With
Want me
that
to
said,
start?
Phil, you're up, or Mary Ann, whoever wants to start.
I will start. Okay, FAB did review the budget. As usual, Mary Ann and her staff is very thorough in what they do with this budget. We understand that, and we endorse the budget as it was presented. So from that standpoint, we're happy with it. Now, just going over a couple things that happened at our last meeting, we did, Sarah Kurtz from, how do you pronounce it, Bailey? Ide Bailey did the audit for last year, 2016, year ending, and you got the best opinion you can get from them. They didn't really find anything that was really out of the ordinary, a couple little issues, but they're minor, so. From that standpoint, good audit, that's all done, so continue on with that. Couple other things. If you look at the budget when you guys review it, you're gonna see that it projects 30 million in total revenues and 31,860 in total expenses, which means you're generating $1,691,000 deficit. I'm kind of rounding off here. That deficit will reduce the overall fund balance in all your funds. It should be noted that basically what the town's doing is it's basically spending on capital projects. So just from an overall budget point of view, it's gonna show $1,691,000 deficit, but it's really not a deficit. I mean, your operating budgets are fine. It's just capital expenses are being spent on stuff that you guys have scheduled to be spent on capital items, and those show as expenses in this budget, so.
So you would put it as investing in the future?
Yes.
So one part of that, Phil, and I don't know if you looked at that if the FAB looked at that, but, you know, year to year, whatever capital projects are not finished, those dollars get, in the past, have always gotten approved in like a reconciliation resolution in
They do, and then
January.
they get rolled over into the next
They
year.
get rolled over, okay? So, on the other hand, what happens is the dollars that aren't spent get put back into the reserve accounts. Am I right about that,
Into the
Mary Ann?
fund balance, whatever is
Into the fund
expected by
balances.
the end of the year.
So, to me, we're kind of double dipping. We're taking money that has been approved but has not been spent. Okay, capital improvement, you know, capital project money,
Right.
been approved, hasn't been spent. We reapprove it to the following year, but at the same time, we put it back into the fund balance.
Well, it has to stay in the fund balance. It's got to go somewhere.
Okay.
So if you haven't spent the money, they reapprove it for next year. Maybe that capital gets rolled into the next year. And tell me where I'm wrong.
Well, it gets rolled on
It has
top
to
of-
stay in the fund balance. There's nowhere else to put it.
Yeah, I get that. No, I get that, but it's reapproved for a following year.
Because we've already closed out the prior year.
I
so-
understand.
So that budget is all closed
I
out.
understand. I'm gonna propose that, because the biggest problem in my mind at the present time is the money that's been budgeted for the housing project, because it's $2.5 million. Okay. I'm gonna propose that we only, we do one of two things. Either we approve the 2018 budget of $550,000 and not approve the reconciliation, the resolution to bring forward the $2.5 million that wasn't spent last year,
Right,
because the 550 is all that we intend or expect to spend in 2018, right? So that's one option.
That's not, so there's health issues going on that you're well aware of, but that issue aside, that's not correct. The 500,000 is in addition to the 2.5 for a total of $3 million. When we put the budget together, we had hoped to spend in 2018.
So how much are we gonna spend next year in 2018?
If you asked me this second to decide, we'd aim to spend the $3 million. We would have construction underway. We'd have it contracted and underway to spend the entire thing next year.
So the 550 is in addition to the 2.5 that we
Correct.
approved
Yeah,
in
I think it's-
2017?
yeah, I think
I
it's
mean,
450
we're
and
using
18.
we're using very round numbers, but yes.
And you wouldn't have to decide on that carryover until we close out 2017.
No, that I
and come back
realize,
to you in
that I realize,
March.
that I realize.
When,
So, you know, I looked at it, I thought that either we should reapprove the 2.5 million in January that we didn't spend and not include the 550, because I thought the 550 was what was intended to be spent this year.
Well, it was, I mean, you could essentially say if they're a year behind on everything, I guess you could say that the 2.5 million, which is already in the 2018 budget, you could say that the 500 could be put in the 2019, but.
let's use real numbers for a second. It was $2.8 million. When we did this budget, when we put this together 2 months ago, we anticipated having spent $350,000 this year.
Yeah, 2,850,000, and then we expected to spend 300, so then we were gonna carry over
Right, 2.5.
2,550,000.
Yes.
And then we're budgeting 450,000 in the 18 budget for a total of a $3 million construction project next year.
Did we spend the 350?
I mean, we have not yet, but that's an issue that gets a little deeper as to our ability to get this project done, and that's the discussion that I owe you guys, that I haven't made a decision on, honestly. We've got some personnel issues that we're not sure that we're gonna be able to deliver on some of these larger projects, and it directly affects housing. And so I've kept it as is, I've kept it status quo, but I very well might have to come back to you, to Mary Ann's point, in February and say, you know what, we're gonna have to bump these back a year. But that's not a budgeting issue. I mean, that's gonna be an actually delivery issue.
Well, it is a budgeting issue, Clint, because if we have to bump it back a year, we shouldn't be budgeting for it in 2018.
But we don't know the reality of the situation that's going on in
Well-
the housing department, and I
I do understand that.
well, we understand it, but you carry with as far as I'm concerned, you carry forward with a budget assuming all good things happen.
What's gonna, to answer part of your question, what's gonna happen if they leave both items in there, because they've got the 450 plus the other two and a half, call it. If you pull that into 2018, if you don't spend any of that, it still gets rolled over into the next year. The question is it really going to be spent next year? Probably not. But it doesn't really change things, because you see what's happening. This is the same thing as using some of those capital funds that are in reserve. If you start they budget to use them, you're gonna bring your fund balance down. If you don't use them, it just gets rolled to the next year like anything else. It's just that maybe they're anticipating too much to do next year, but.
Well, but,
I'm sorry, the FAB, we had this discussion, and
Yeah.
you guys correct me. The way we described it is we wanted to make sure we had the total amount of dollars in the budget for any year we go under contract. I mean, for legal reasons and financing reasons, that we weren't just parceling out, you know, if it's a $3 million project expected to take 3 years, the way we budget for that is we have $3 million available on day one before we go under contract for that, or before we anticipate that
Yeah.
project. And what the FAB's concern was almost the opposite of yours. What they didn't want to see was us guessing that those extra $2 million are going to show up at some point and cross our fingers. They wanted to make sure that we had the dollars in hand before we went under contract or started the work. And that's the way we do it. So they looked at it, I don't want to say 180 from the way you're looking at it, but they looked at it differently than the way you're looking
well,
at
I
it.
mean, the primary reason, and I'm even bringing all this up, is because we say one of our principles, one of our budget philosophies is to limit it, you know, do a balanced budget. Well, we haven't had a balanced budget. We didn't do one in 2017. We're not proposing one in 2018.
Right.
And the reason that they don't look balanced is because of the amount of capital improvement that's in these budgets.
Well, they're balanced from an operating standpoint for their general operations, but the way you do these public budgets is you've got capital set aside, and whether you have it set aside or not, you have, when you spend that capital, it shows up as an expense.
Right.
You already have the funds sitting in a bucket on the side, so until you've spent, and I can't remember how much excess funds we have, 4 million or so, until you've spent those funds down to zero, then you really truly aren't having deficit spending, because some of that spending that you're doing every year that's capital shows up as expenses. So on paper, it looks like you're having a deficit, but the reality of it is you aren't, because you're pulling money out of these funds that were set aside.
This is a piece of paper, you got it in your workbook, when you picked up your paper budget. And this is kind of the answer for the FAB, this is kind of what they asked for. And we'll go over it more in detail. We can do it right now, we're on Friday, but it talks about what we think we're gonna spend and what actually ends up happening. We can show you then how that fund balance grows. But it's, the way we try to get it done is to make sure that we don't spend the dollars before we have the dollars in hand. And then if you include capital, and I mean, I like Marky's term, investment, then yeah, we're gonna, and because we've saved so much, we've got a savings account saved up, and we make those investments, we spend more than we bring in, only because we have had those savings accounts in the first place. We're not borrowing money to make the budget happen.
So we really have two things going on, and healthcare is totally different than town. So you have your operating budget with its revenue. You want to be very clear that that is producing a positive bottom line.
Correct.
As a net income. Then you want to have your capital budget, and you have all these reserves. So what I hear you saying is we have a pretty darn large capital reserve that we have built up over the last few years from where we didn't have any. And so what we're doing is looking at those funds and saying, okay, a capital budget is different than an operating budget, and your capital has excess resources in it now to help invest for the future and viability of the town.
Yes.
Just as any 501c3 or any company would do, be the investment in the future. If you didn't have the dollars, you wouldn't do the projects. Now, I will tell you, I've argued against myself on this issue as I look at the town budget, because one thing I hate to see in print, and it was in print last week, Snowmass looks like another deficit budget. That I don't remember all the words, but it looked like we didn't know what the heck we were doing. I don't know if it was you, Erica. But quite frankly, what the newspapers or what the audience, and I did receive a few emails about it, a few phone calls, was trying to explain the difference between an operating budget and a capital budget, and the purpose of the capital is to invest in the future of an organization or a town. So if you think that way, and I hear Bob, we don't know what's gonna happen even tomorrow. We don't even know what's gonna happen 5 years from now, or 2 years from now, or next month.
And I'll speak to that in a minute,
So, yeah,
into the future, but.
so thinking about that, it's probably better to go ahead and budget for your capital projects now than tomorrow.
Correct. To put it in simple terms, when you look at, because they do have these things in different buckets, each fund. If you look at the one that's got all the housing fund,
Yeah.
essentially, they're making money, that makes money every year, because the town owns those buildings. They're rented out, and it's bringing in net income every year. Well, so in the budget, you see net income coming in, but they're saving that money and not spending a lot of it into that Mountain View, I can't remember the names of the, we should put them
Housing
in,
Mountain
we
View
should,
1,
we
Mountain
should
View
make them all
2.
one. But, so if you pool all that money together and it's sitting there growing, then last year you spent, I can't remember what we spent on the buildings.
$3 million.
Yeah, about 3 million.
Well, that money came out of those funds that were saved. So, from a budget, when you look at that budget from last year, you're showing you spent more money, but you essentially spent the money that you saved in that fund. So, if you can understand it that way, that's how it works.
And the one thing we've done the last couple of years, if there's a level of nervousness, is we've increased, we call them reserves. We have different kinds of reserves, but we have an emergency reserve that we've increased from 16 or 17% to 25%. And so that's a reserve that we don't intend to touch unless something catastrophic happens. Then we've got other reserves set aside, and then on top of all that, we've got in a reserve, but basically it's funds available. And that's the money that Phil's talking about. Those are the dollars that we spend. We don't spend into those reserves. And so it's money over and above all our reserve limits that we put into the capital. And that's where we get comfortable saying, okay, yeah, this is the right money to be investing in
But there are some of the
infrastructure.
reserves that we do have to use because they're there for that purpose, like the boilers. It's
Right.
coming out of the SGM Building Capital Maintenance Reserve, because that's what it's budgeted for.
Now, just so you know, FAB did look at, they looked 5 years into the future on their budgets, right through 2022. And if you look at those, speaking to this, you'll see that the funds available in this general fund will go from like 2.7 million in 2018, all the way down to a deficit of 582,000 in 2022. Now, on paper, that looks real alarming too, and every time we look at it, we go, why is this happening? Basically, what they're doing is putting all the cards on the table for all the capital projects. They've put, and I presume every conceivable capital project you have, you've put into this budget. And then they run that out in the future, and it does show a deficit, but they look every year at what they need to spend, and they're actually pretty conservative doing it that way. At least we know from looking at it that they've got all the projects on the table. It doesn't mean that they're gonna spend them all.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not part of these numbers here. That has to do with the expenditures over the revenues, which is the chart that we have to go over to council, so.
I mean, what happens is, if you remember last year, and we put this in the cover letter to you guys, we said in 2018, when we put the 2018 budget together, we identified, and I'm going off my memory, but $180,000 deficit that needed to be rectified. And we committed to you, when you adopted the 2017 budget, that we would rectify that in 2018. And we have, and we've done it through decreasing some expenses, and luckily we had some increases in revenues, and more than we anticipated. So we balanced that. So to Phil's point, what we kind of show is kind of a worst-case scenario going forward, and that's why we showed that surplus going down and down and down. But every year, as staff, we've committed to the council, you're gonna get a balanced budget. And that, when we fix the year we're in, that makes going forward better. And that's what we talked about last week with I used the term sandbagging. If you can call it that, or you can call it, to Phil, I like Phil's, we put everything on the table. We said, this is the worst it can be, and we're gonna make sure that every year that you adopt it, it's actually better than this, because we're gonna make sure it's balanced. And we make those appropriate changes in that.
So this assumes basically a 3% increase in terms of revenue across the board, cumulative? I was trying to do the math.
Yeah,
think that's
probably, roughly, yeah.
Yeah, about 3%.
It's not it's crystal ball stuff. It's not fancy predictions or anything. We're just trying to say what's a reasonable revenue increase. And And that's why, I mean, honestly, I think those future years, I mean, it's an indication, but it's the current year budget that we spend all our time on. That's the one that we make sure is budgeted.
Because no one can predict the future. I've said
No.
on council
It's
6
hard enough-
years before this and every year.
It's hard enough
Same
for us to
story.
do 14 months, because right now, you know,
Yeah.
we're trying to project for 14 months right now, and that's hard enough. You add 12 on top of that, and it gets less, obviously it gets less and less, and that's why we're just focusing on next year, what do we think's realistic? We're already a little bit ahead of revenues, because when we do our revenue projections for last year, or for 18, we start those projections in the middle of the summer, and we're tracking a little ahead in 17, so we're actually a little ahead already, which is great news. But we do that on purpose to make sure we can deliver at the end of the year. And that's helps build the fund balance, because the revenue's coming a little higher than the expenses, and to the department director's credit, they don't try and spend every dime that's earmarked or allocated to them, and so between a little higher revenue than expected and a little lower expense than expected, that helps contribute to that fund balance.
But I have another question that's totally unrelated to this fund balance issue, and that is reading the tea leaves of what's going to be coming out of Washington as it impacts some of the grants that we receive for transportation or any other funds that are grant dollars. Are those at risk?
Are they at risk? Absolutely. But we kept them steady.
What we budgeted for was steady state, and that the grant dollars will
But
be
I mean,
there.
having done this for a while, transportation grants have been at risk for years, and it's not by administration or anything. Those are an easy grant for people that, at federal level, to kind of point fingers at. And so if it happens, we're gonna have to change course. We're gonna have to change the way we do business. And the biggest one is for our capital grants, for buses. Those are significant, and then we get some grants for operating as well, but
But you got a pretty new fleet
Yeah.
because of the grants, but to the extent that those grants go away,
It would-
I would presume you're gonna keep the buses longer.
we would do that. I mean, it would be an exceptionally big deal. It would affect, I would gotta assume every transit
Because I
agency
know the
across
flap
the nation.
grants are gone, and some of those are gone, but,
It's gonna be tough for them to make
okay,
that change.
thank you.
But to answer your question, we projected flat on those
Okay.
status quo.
Okay.
Moving to 15-minute headways is gonna have a budget impact for Snowmass, right? I mean, Raft is not gonna pick up 100%.
That's that 294,000, and no, they are. We're asking the EOTC, because we consider this a regional route, and they're asking the EOTC to pick it up as part of the regional service.
But we have it budgeted for as well.
Because
We have the revenue
because we
and
got
the
the revenues and the
expenditure.
expenses, but we expect it to be offset, so it'll be neutral
To
for
come
us.
from them, okay.
In the spring and the fall, the town picks up that service. We actually contract with RAFTA to provide that service. And so we've budgeted to make sure we've got the personnel and the buses available, but we'd have the revenue offset from RAFTA to make that happen.
And when we get to the transportation budget, I have something I want to throw out on the table, just an idea. But do we want to have?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I
I'll
keep
finish.
interrupting Phil,
Yes,
let him go
yeah.
through his magic here.
Phil, you're doing a great job.
Okay, good.
So does that make sense? That's how I finally got my arms wrapped around this budget in terms of operation,
Yeah, no, you're
being balanced and blah, 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 and then capital budget, totally separate.
correct.
Okay, thank you,
You're on the right track.
thank you.
Speaking of emergency reserve funds and that sort of thing, marketing group sales, you'll notice this year that they increased their reserves from 15 to 25%, and that's of their total operating revenues. So that essentially, I think that was a little bit of a bone of contention with marketing, because because you're basically taking some of the money that they're gonna spend away, because you're putting it into a reserve. But albeit, it goes back to what we talked about before, they're being pretty conservative with their funds to set aside more money in reserve in case you have a downfall in the economy, something happens, at least they've got the money set aside to spend, because they'll need to spend it more then when you have a downturn than you do now. So, that is in there, so when you guys go through the budget, you'll see that. One thing we did talk about, and this is just really for the town to be cognizant of increasing property tax burden on basically all the owners in this valley, or in Snowmass. Some of those mill levies have been reduced because of some bonds fell off.
Yeah, the Drosty, is it the Drosty that fell off?
Well, we did the refinancing on the recreation center bonds.
Okay,
And that's it, well, and some fell off last year,
We have
but,
some more, yeah.
Those two
The
started.
housing bonds, definitely have been falling down, so. But that doesn't affect, property taxes.
but just we, as an FAB board, and many of us own homes here too, but I mean, just as, to look at it for property taxes, if you ever think of increasing a mill levy or anything, just be aware, we just had Aspen School District mill levy get added on. We had the Snowmass water and sanitation deal get added on.
And the water.
And then we had the water, well, that's
that's-
water,
And the
and
fire
then
department.
And the
fi-
fire
excuse me,
department.
the fire department got added on.
Yep.
So those three things are actually gonna increase, I believe it's gonna be a net increase in your property tax bill, even though the state reduced
It came
the
down, but it's gonna go right.
7.92 to 7.2.
Yeah,
And water and sand and fire hit in 2017 bill.
Yeah, which
This
we
year's
haven't got yet.
No, for this year.
No, it's,
Yeah,
Wasn't on my
for-
bill.
for
oh,
collections.
yes, it wasn't on my bill.
Yeah, they went, because the total for the village went from 44.247 mils to 49.344.
But we haven't received
you don't get
those.
that, that's the
So-
2017
We haven't
bill
received
that we
that
don't
tax
pay
bill.
till,
That was for collections. That was for this year's collections.
Okay, we haven't received,
we haven't got, see, the 2017 bill is actually, we pay it
2018.
We don't
February
have
or
that yet.
Here.
April, so we don't actually
Yeah.
have it on our bill. So people are gonna see this on their bills now.
It's gonna make a difference.
But just, we just wanted to bring it up, is just be cognizant of the fact that we've added on these mill levies for these projects. They're gonna be on our bills for what? Those bonds are 20-year bonds or something? I don't know what I can't remember what the fire, they're probably 20-year bonds, the fire, the
I
sanitation.
think they're good 20 years
Yeah, I
if they're
think
not
they are. Yeah,
25 year.
they're a long time.
Right, so those are gonna be on those tax bills for a long time.
Yes.
School district is 5 years, but the others are a long time.
Right. And I realize it's not the town who's voting on those things, people voted it, but they're in there and they've got all this nice new stuff, but you gotta pay for it.
The bad news is we're all gonna get phone calls as soon as everybody gets their tax bill.
Right. So, that was just a note.
Bless you.
Another thing you wanna be aware of that we went through in this budget is the defined contribution plans, that was all increased, I think.
Yes.
One went from 7 to 8, and the other from 8 to 9.
Correct.
So those have increased, and we discussed this increase in conjunction with a discussion on year-end bonuses versus base salary increases. We don't have any recommendation to change anything you're doing. This is another kind of, hey, we suggest that you guys be aware that some of this stuff will limit your being able to change things later on if you have a deficit years going on, because, again, we aren't saying you change anything, but we looked at, okay, you've added 1% to defined contribution plans, so that's fine. You had the money to do it. Of course, it's later on, as we all know, it's harder to take the 1% away later on. So that's been done. In addition, we talked about bonuses versus salary increases. Obviously, if you were on the track of giving more bonuses versus salary increases, you have a lot better leeway in lean years to adjust for that. So it's just something we're bringing up.
Did you all look at the CPI? Bob Circus was sharing with us last week that the CPI was less than 2%.
Two, I don't know.
What was it?
I don't know, I'll look.
Well, that was the year
I think
before.
I got it here. I think it was 2.9,
2.777,
I think is what I
And this
remember.
year, right now, they're projecting around 3% CPI increase. Because I have to use
No,
that
it was
for my
one-
property.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but-
it was
yeah.
one, it was 1.9 from
1.9%.
August 1st to July 31st.
Not this past year.
Yeah,
It depends, well, I think it was this past year. If you use all cities, it depends on
Right.
which index you're
Yeah, I'm
using.
using
That's
the
right, the
Boulder,
old cities.
Boulder, Denver.
Yeah,
all cities index.
yeah, the Boulder Denver one might be
That's the one
different.
that we have to use for our property tax calculations.
We use Boulder, Denver.
Denver, Boulder, yep.
which is growing.
And that's the one that
Yeah, it
is
is.
projected at 3% right now, as of the September, because there's two numbers that come out, one from the Department of Budgeting and one from the Division of Planning. And so what I do is I add those up and average them.
Why do we use Boulder, Denver? Is it,
Because it's required under Tabor.
Well, I guess the one that's closest to this area, they don't have. You know, you have certain cities, I don't know how many city ones there are. in
We're
there.
rural.
Anthony,
Yeah, we're
like
rural.
Marion said, Tabor requires Denver, Boulder, CPI. Everything's based on that. That's-
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Except governmental reimbursement for healthcare is not, but anyway.
Okay.
And Rudy Bruce, so, make your argument that way too. That's fine.
Yeah.
So that's just something we brought up, just so you guys are aware of that. We don't,
What's-
we don't specifically look at salaries or any of that.
Right.
We don't see that, so.
What's the current, town's position about annual increases? Is it all salary, is it mixed, or is it, what is the town currently doing?
So we have ranges for every position, a
Yes.
minimum hiring range and a topped-out range. And you work through that range through different, depending on how your review goes primarily, so it's pay for performance.
Uh-huh.
If the ranks there's names for those ranks, but basically 1 through 4, I believe 70% of the staff gets, just for ease of today, we call it a successful ranking, and that the last couple of years, that's been a 4% increase. This year, we didn't change the scale, so you went through the scale.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, because we were a little bit behind in some of the salaries, we actually changed the scale, and then, so that means you actually went less through the scale. Something off the top of my head, 30%, 27% of our staff is topped out, so that means 27% of the staff only gets bonuses, they don't get a pay increase. So it depends on where you are on the scale, Counselor Circus, how that works. If you're
Okay.
just starting off, you can get those raises for a number of years. If you've been here for a while, unless the scale changes, you're gonna get it all in bonus.
Okay.
Very similar to other industry.
And we have that discussion, once a year, how much do we change the scales? And this year, for 17, we didn't change them at all, so everybody went through. And, internally, we have discussions about, should it be different for different kinds of jobs, for different kinds of departments? Or if you're starting off, should you go through a little quicker and kind of maybe top out a little faster? We've had all sorts of discussions, but the range, depending on the position, is either 30% or 40%. The more professional the position, the wider the range. And so it depends on how quickly, that factors in how quickly you can top out.
Okay, Phil.
The only other point we had is, we're willing to look at any topic you want us to give. We only have one or two more.
Yeah, you have, the comp plan you wanted to look at, you have the poster plan you wanted to look at.
Right.
And then building 6.
Right, well, that's the big one we brought up that we would like to, that we brought up that you haven't recommended us, but we'd like to look at is Building 6. That was supposed to be leased to Aces, I guess, and
Yeah.
that deal fell through. So
Yes.
now you have a building that you've had the developer build for you, and it's gonna cost money to run, and, we just wanna look at that and make sure everybody understands the impact that that's gonna have on the town.
Yeah, we have an RFP out.
Yes.
Yes, you're probably familiar with that. And that's due on November 1st.
But you're looking at either nonprofits, private, whoever.
We're looking at anything. Even, it was discussed last week, and it'll be a topic for discussion on November 6th, is perhaps even listing the property for sale.
Oh, okay.
And I know there's still some thoughts about the Discovery Center / ACES. But the point is, I haven't yet to see a plan on how that's gonna ever be funded, if that were the notion of the council in our town.
Right.
So whatever happens, it has to go through FAB as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
I think it has to.
I agree completely.
Yeah, because I don't think the town wants to have another building, as we talked, that's gonna run a deficit to run.
It's not we're not in the business to run deficits on having a building.
Right. The nice part of it is you don't have a bond on it, so. Because I assume that was built,
It's
the
being
people
built
paid
now.
for it, the developer paid for the whole
Yeah.
building, or is paying for the building.
Yes,
Because it's being built right now.
it's under
Yes, it's under
construction.
construction.
I need to go walk over there and look at that. What's going on over there?
There's a lot going on over there. It's good stuff, but this creates somewhat of a challenge at best.
Okay,
So if you have a great idea, send it forward.
Send us a letter.
okay. I don't have any right now, but I'll think about it. Okay, so that was
great.
basically what we looked at, what we talked about. I think everything looks great. The town's pretty conservative with the dollars that are coming in. Again, I don't have a problem personally seeing funds sitting aside waiting to be spent later on for capital projects, so that you don't get yourselves in a situation where, you know, some of these rental buildings that you've been renting for years need to be redone, and they aren't redone, and you don't have the money for it. These guys are setting the money aside to do it, so.
So let me throw out something I was thinking about. And this ties back to a RAFTA discussion, the upper mobility study, all the stuff we're doing at RAFTA, spending millions of dollars on more studies that tend not to go very far. Okay. I'm trying to be kind in my words. So, one of the issues that we talked about, I think it was 2 years ago or 1 year ago here, was expanding the WeCycle program. And we all know that we're challenged at best for these elevation gains and what have you. And we all know we had the e-bike conversation, what was it, a month or 2 months ago? And we've had the same discussion at RAFTA. We also have out there on the table this whole headway issue. So I've been talking to a few people about WeCycle and the availability of e-bikes through WeCycle in order that people could pick up a WeCycle and climb up this hill or all the way out of the intercept lot. That technology and that program is available now in WeCycle.
That's the rental bikes like they have in
The
town.
rental
Yeah.
bikes like they have in Aspen
Yeah.
and Basalt, okay? So my thinking would be, and this is on the agenda for EOTC, is perhaps we in Snowmass somewhat, we become the center of innovation. Aspen wants to do their mobility lab that I still don't understand whatever that Aspen think tank thing is. But I'm thinking in terms of a center of innovation, if we could work with WeCycle and perhaps look at that as a technology in a public-private partnership that would ease some of our transportation issues, not only now, but going into the future.
That'll help in the summertime.
It'll help us, it won't happen in the winter, but
Winter's an issue, but
yeah, but I'm just saying that anything we can do to get buses or more cars, if you will, off of Brush Creek, then we won't have the pressure to eventually, particularly during the summertime, which so many people come
no,
out here.
that's a great idea, because the e-bikes for people who aren't willing to go hoof it up the hill, they're pretty cool in that regard.
I'm just saying, I think we ought to talk about it through this budget process, and perhaps it's not 2018, but maybe it's 2019. But I'm thinking we ought to, that's me saying that.
Using a WeCycle program essentially outside of EOTC,
Yes,
but just a Snowmass Village WeCycle
recycle program, and it's part of RAFTA now, recycle is. So maybe we sit down with MRTA
Yeah,
and ask, and begin to explore what an e-cycle program might look like and
it
how we might work with
and
it.
it might go from here to Buttermilk or here to
the
the
intercept
intercept lot. Either way.
Or here to Aspen.
Yeah,
Well,
There's a path all the way down Brush Creek. You can basically take the path all the way for, you know, people who want to get on a road. Plus, you wouldn't, if you're gonna get people on e-bikes, you wouldn't want them on the road anyways, because a lot of people who do that don't ride very well, so you don't want them on the road.
Well, the
I
first
mean,
thing,
that's
Just
true.
saying.
No,
I
it's
don't
true.
like bikes, I hear you.
well, you're talking to a pro right there.
but the first step is to make sure we have the right-of-ways, right? So, and we're going through that process already, so if we can
Yes.
if we are even in a position to allow e-bikes.
I'm thinking
on
like
bike.
the paved surfaces, Brush Creek Trail. I mean, perfect for an e-bike.
But some of those are on,
Not
easements.
Brush Creek going down, is it? Yes, it is. Okay, fine. Thank you very much.
I
Okay,
mean,
fine.
honestly, that's one of those that we think e-bikes won't be allowed on,
Oh, shoot.
On Brush Creek, because of
underlying
Darcy?
easement. I haven't seen the details of it yet, but I know that's one that was pointed out, that the
Because of
easement,
an easement, doesn't allow you to put an e-bike on? Why?
put motorized bike on,
Well, it's considered a motorized bike.
motorized vehicle.
There is an issue with that a little bit on the bike paths, because when I ride down to Aspen, even on Owl Creek, I don't get on the bike path, because if I'm going too fast, you'd kill somebody on the bike path, so I go on the road, just because.
Because you're an excellent rider,
Well-
too.
No, but I mean, if you can't really ride fast on a bike path, and the problem with the e-bike is that if you're going, those things will go fast.
Well, unless
Well-
you set them at class 1 or 2 at 14.
14 or 20, whatever it is. But you could do 20 miles an hour. People do 20 miles an hour on the bike
Oh,
paths
hell,
all
he
the time.
flies.
Right.
All the time. And,
Yeah.
yes, and I'm total agreement. You and I don't ride on a bike path going down Owl Creek.
No, because you're going too fast.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
do
do
you
we
ride
want to
it
even
going
look
up?
at it?
Yeah, I ride it going up,
Yeah.
because honestly, it's safer to ride going up.
It is. I mean,
Because
Phil,
of the
I mean, you should,
speed, again, because of the speed that we go,
Yeah.
it's safe to ride going up.
I mean, if you're not going 15 miles an hour, you should be on the bike path. I mean, that's what they're there for.
Yeah.
But as the speed increases, like going down Brush Creek Road is, we call the bike path the roller coaster. I mean, if you're going fast down Brush Creek Road, it's pretty entertaining. But it's not very entertaining when you come upon someone walking a dog on a leash.
Yeah, no, that would be an issue with e-bikes, but as far as in cities and around towns, they're neat because you're getting people off the streets, driving cars around. If they can get on an e-bike and zip 3 blocks and go somewhere. And around town in here, it'd be great. I realize there is the issue going longer distances, whether you can put them on a bike path or not, so.
But just because they go faster doesn't mean you necessarily have to limit them. I mean, a Lamborghini can drive on the roads and,
Right.
it still has to go the speed limit. So that becomes the argument then, or do we need to have
That's the lawyer talking over there.
speed limits on the bike path?
Well, it's
Yeah.
just something I think that I personally am thinking we need to explore every option possible to protect our valley and, RAFTA, next year is gonna be going out for a property tax in 2018.
Yes, they are.
And,
Oh, they are?
yep,
Yeah.
RAFTA's, because to fund e-buses and,
Some
yeah,
other things.
expansions of services,
Well, first they're doing that study,
which is
the polling.
ridiculous. But anyway,
It was actually a very interesting conversation.
very interesting, but how much money we spent on
lot.
Parsons? Over $3 million.
Yeah, but we learned we need 50 electric buses from that $3 million.
At $100,000 apiece.
You could have bought half of them first.
Yeah, no kidding.
So I'm just throwing this out here. I think we can have more discussion later.
And there's there's $100,000 in the draft EOTC budget for recycle, from EOTC to recycle, in addition to whatever else they receive from organizations. So that might be a good time to bring that up too and say, that was included in the EOTC budget last year. There was a discussion that Snowmass Village doesn't receive any of that service right now. The answer was, well, you get it at the end of the line, just not the beginning of the line, which there's truth to for sure, but I think that might be a time to say, okay, it's been a year now, how do we get some of that service
I think
where
we
we're
have to,
living?
I think we have to really start working on how do we get some of the benefits of being part of EOTC.
Yeah, the problem with Snowmass, I can see the e-bikes as a problem here, is the hills.
Yeah.
Aspen's
Yes.
easy because it's flat.
Yes.
People,
But it's interesting, when Murda talked to us, e-bikes were not available through whatever company she works with,
Right.
but they are now available through that company. And
The two locations we think would come to the front for the WeCycle, not necessarily e-bike, is Club Commons to Town Park Center. That's about, however long that is, but that's flat. And then the other one is from Mountain View over to the mall. That's not flat, but it's not
that hard.
it's not tremendous. And so those are the ones that we started talking about, trying to figure through. E-bikes could expand those ranges for sure, but those are the two sets of locations we started talking about.
Yeah, let's
What
just,
about, what
ahead.
about the mall to the town, to the Snowmass Center? I mean, people could use e-bikes instead of walking.
and
Or-
remember, it was in the Enclave proposal,
Yeah,
their own
It
e-bikes.
is in the Enclave proposal.
Yeah, and to the mayor's point, we weren't thinking e-bikes. We were trying to think flat. If e-bikes were in the mix, that could change the dynamics, for sure.
I think a conversation with Murda at some point in time would be very, very helpful, but I'm just throwing it out there as a potential budget placeholder or
No, it's a
consideration.
neat idea to get people to use that instead of driving cars around.
Sure.
I guess, especially people up on, I mean, like, even up on our hill, most people won't ride up the hill.
I've tried it, it doesn't work for me, I can ride down, so I do
You got an e-bike, you get up that hill.
That's exactly
E-bike
right.
will take you up, yeah.
Okay, let's go on through the various, did you have anything on healthcare, anything else?
There's nothing else we looked at, no.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, let's,
Thanks, Phil.
So
Welcome.
on Friday, we're gonna.
thank you.
Thanks. You gonna stick around?
I'll stick around
You
for a
don't
few
have to, I'm
minutes.
just kidding you.
I will stick around for a
I
few
say
minutes and
that
I'll
to
leave.
everybody. You don't have to do that. Sorry, let me get my right spot here.
So what's next, Mary Ann?
Honestly, the only thing I also wanted to touch on today was just to make sure that, as we saw with this discussion, we can get into the weeds really quick about the difference between where the funds are, how the fund balances work.
Yep.
You know, how we transfer from the general fund to the CIP. That's all the kind of stuff that we'll be getting into on Friday with you, and we'll have all the charts, and it's a PowerPoint presentation that's similar to what you saw last year. It gets very much into the detail. Before we did that, I wanted to just spend a few minutes to make sure that we've had a chance to kind of go over the letter. In that letter that Mary Ann and I wrote to you dated October 2nd, we really did try to hit the big points without the detail on purpose, just to make sure that if there was something policy-wise that you thought we should be touching on more aggressively, or something that was making you nervous for whatever reason. I just wanted to kind of get a feel for that tonight, and if everything kind of seems to be in the right spots and the proportions seem to be reasonable, I think we're set to get in the weeds. But I didn't want to lose the big picture before we jumped into a lot of the detail on Friday. I wanted to make sure you had that chance to talk about the big picture this evening. And if everything's kind of lined up okay, then that makes Friday's discussion a little bit easier. If we're dead wrong, there's no reason to get into the detail, and we can make those corrections before.
Well, I did have a question over on page 14 under land and land improvements, but I'll hold that till Friday. It gets into the relocation of the ice rink, so we'll
The
talk.
110,000.
Yeah, yeah.
I think the biggest question that I have is, we're setting aside a lot of money for these CLIP projects, and I think that it's important that we are on task to get them done, and that's why I think you have outlined in there that we're looking at bringing somebody on to
Get them done.
to spearhead those projects.
Yes.
Because I think it's great. I mean, I'm still a fan of the connectivity plan, and I hope once we get through the comp plan, we can adopt it. But projects that are in there, like the crosswalk down at Town Park, that we've kind of has been pushed down the road, I want to make sure that those projects are coming online.
And we've seen that as an issue that needs to be addressed, and that's why you see it in here. We realize that we need to have a person focused on getting these list of projects achieved. And luckily, or, you know, I'll give credit where credit's due, between Mary Ann and Ann, they've identified a position that was not being utilized, and instead of adding a new position, we reconfigured it and took those expenses that weren't being spent and put it towards a new we had to add some to make it work right. But I mean, that's a good example of, we saw something that we weren't utilizing and we just reconfigured it to meet this goal. Because we've all identified an aggressive CIP on numbers when you're not making the construction happen is not that useful. So we need to make it happen.
Good.
Good stuff. Thank you very much, Philly. You're welcome to stay for the housing discussion.
I'm gonna leave. Because I have work to do.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Phil. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you, Phil.
So on Friday, if we're done with this, we'll start with the kind of I'll call it the traditional
PowerPoint?
PowerPoint. and you will kind of go through it. We've got some of the new charts that the FAB asked for last time, about how carry forwards work. We'll see some of the projects and get into kind of any details. And the idea of being on Friday, we'll present a ton of detail. You've got it all, but we'll talk it through a little bit. And then if there's hard questions that we don't know the answer to, we've got several meetings lined up afterwards that we can get those detailed questions answered. My guess is we'll be able to answer 91.5% of them, but if you stump us, Well-
When do you want to talk about the benefit report?
it's up to you guys. We can do it Friday. Or-
Just, again, I'm sort of throwing this out, but would it be valuable to us, for us, to have Kathy at that, during the time we talk about this? You know, I mean, some of this is obviously financial, Marianne, but others is not. Other parts of it are more human resource related,
Sure.
I think.
Yeah, no, and the big picture is what we've tried to do is kind of bend that cost curve, but we've set how much money we're gonna spend next
Right.
year, rather than having it dictated to us, here's what the insurance costs. We've budgeted, okay, here's how much we're willing to spend, and we'll go shop with those dollars. But we can certainly, I can have Kathy be here on Friday. If we wanna start, I can ask her to be here at 8:30 and kind of start with that discussion and then jump.
9:30.
I'm sorry, 9:30, and then jump in the PowerPoint from there.
Okay.
I think that's a good idea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marianne.
Nice job, Marianne.
Okay.
I'll have boxes the next time. Friday. Huh? I need a caddy, yeah. Are you offering? No?
My days of caddying are over.
So we have 9:30 to 1:30, right?
Okay.
Long
Yes.
time ago.
Okay, housing. Come on up, Terry. How are you?
Good, how you doing?
Thank you for all your hard work these days.
Hello?
So this is something, kind of a generic topic at this point, but the council asked maybe a month or so back to, I guess, review housing regulations and, housing regulations. And so we went ahead and provided you two sets. We've got our regulations, which are a little bit more detailed than we provide in the code language that's in there. They overlap a lot when you read through it, but those are the two sets of regulations that we use for enforcement through either both well, mostly the sale and rental. So I really kind of leave it up to you guys. The one point that I will point, before we get into any deep discussion, is that we do all believe as staff that these regulations need to be updated. Back to the budget discussion, we put dollars in the budget next year, $50,000 in the budget next year for two purposes. One, to help increase enforcement, and two, to help get these regulations updated. And in all honesty, that's kind of a WAG number. If you need to know what WAG is, I'll tell you after the meeting. But
We all know.
yeah, that was kind of a joke. It's hard to make budget interesting, that's why. Anyhow, so we don't know, we did that, we put the number in the budget with the understanding that we know that we need to make some adjustments, that we know that there needs to be some resources put towards some enforcement actions, and we put those dollars in there to make those happen in 2018.
So what would be the skill set of this individual,
Which individual?
this $50,000 a year employee?
It's not an employee, it's a one-time dollar. And so the two projects we aim to get for is one, for the updates, what I would propose today, and this is up for discussion, is that you let us go ahead and draft up some proposed changes and have them reviewed by you all for adoption. Basically a staff-driven, it's like, here's how we see it, here's some adjustments we think need to be made, some suggestions, and then let you guys chew on it.
So,
And then the other expense is sometimes we have to hire outside counsel to help with, when we go through the enforcement of the regulations, and those dollars have been spent this year, and we would anticipate spending more dollars next year.
so I have a question on a footnote, page 4 of 13.
Which,
Which
It was a
part?
second document, that's the regulations. It's,
oh, the one where it talks about the priority. of the
it's on
policy?
34, 35 of the work of this session.
What's the red
And
number,
that's
Mark?
on,
Under the table, the occupancy table? Is that
yeah,
what
you
you're
got an
talking about?
occupancy table, but you have a footnote right above it.
Right.
Tell me the red number you're looking at.
I'm looking at page 4 of 13.
Oh, the maximum income limit?
Page red 35.
I got that
Uh-huh.
question too.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. So I go through the chart, and it talks about assets, blah, 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 okay? And that's on page 3 of 13. And then I go to page 4 of 13. But footnote number 2, it says max income is limited to an amount not greater than $40,000, plus an amount that is calculated as the annual amount necessary to amortize 80% of the purchase price over 30 years at 7.5%, very outdated, divided by 24% to a max of 170,000. So, can someone explain
How that works?
how that works?
Yeah.
Quinn's thinking hard.
I'm just trying, I was listening and I was trying to find where you're reading it. I'm sorry.
It's on page 4 of 13 on the second document,
It's-
and on the
it's
packet it's
just
35.
above- It's just above 17.3.3.
Above the first priority occupancy table. Above that 17.3, and then it's right above that. They're small.
You don't
they're
have town
footnotes.
staff that can figure this out. How the hell do you do it? Sorry.
You see it now?
You see where I'm
Yeah,
talking about?
Yeah, and you're reading the footnote, and I'd have to go back and read where the footnote is,
It's page 413 above 17.3.3.
yeah, I see that. I
Right,
just
he
want to
wants
see
to know
where
where
it's,
the
where it's
footnote's coming
commented
from.
on back here.
It's actually not.
I don't think it is
Denoted anywhere.
commented.
No, I'm just asking.
We didn't see where the footnote came from,
Yeah,
but it refers back
to a footnote.
to the chart that's on the previous
Yeah.
page.
Right.
And then I have a question about that page, this whole table, max income and net worth. When you find what you're looking for.
Mark, you have that? Oh, I'm gonna have to find out for you. I don't, unless you can do it off the top of your head.
I think that's when they first established the full guidelines on that, way back in 2002, was it? Or was it before that, John?
2002 is before me, but I
Yeah.
think what it is, it's a number that's, I don't wanna say, it's estimated with, we had, various bankers on the housing committee at that point, and it's a carrying number to carry a mortgage. So it's a number that allows you to carry a mortgage of the maximum of 80%, and that's how they get to that. How it exactly works, I couldn't tell you.
And we've never
I didn't
updated
sit
it.
with that.
And I'd have to read closer, and I think what John's saying is right, that's the logic, and that's explaining the logic, and then that equates to this column that talks about the actual income for the home price.
Right.
That footnote drives, for lack of a better term, column
Maximum
number
income.
2. So if someone were to say, how did you get these incomes? That's the answer, it's 40% plus the carrying cost of that mortgage payment, and that creates column number 2. So if you're buying a $100,000 house, your maximum income is $91,000. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get all of that, okay? Now, here's a question that I can't answer when I'm sometimes asked about our housing program. So let's say, I have a property over in one of the islands,
In an island?
an island,
So not within the drainage.
not within the drainage area. Or I have an offshore company, or I have various trust vehicles.
I'm sorry, Rhonda, would you pull your mic up and repeat that?
So I'm just asking, because somehow I'm somewhat knowledgeable about some people that may be in employee housing that have various instruments where their money is not, yeah,
Understand that the net worth is a calculation that's performed at qualification.
so if I have an offshore company
Well, at
and I get income
qualification,
from them,
and it's not included in your net worth, you're committing fraud.
And you never know.
Well, some of those people may have purchased those after they qualified and got into,
I
In other
don't,
words,
I
they-
don't know.
yeah.
But my point is that that is a qualification, so it's a snapshot when you apply to buy affordable housing. Okay? Now, if you hit the Powerball the day after you move in, it's not a factor. It's not a continuing qualifying. The continuing qualifications are, and I might miss one, but it is that you work, you're employed in the village or the county afterwards. $1,400 a year, you reside in the house, and there's a few other ones like you don't have to register to vote, but you must be eligible to register to vote, which is a residency. You must be eligible, but you don't have to have a Colorado driver's license. There's a couple other, I might have missed them.
You know, I noticed that, and I actually picked up on that when I was reading through these
Me
regs.
too.
And it occurred to me, if we require someone to requalify every year before they buy something, or why don't we require someone to qualify with all the same criteria, the income criteria, the net income criteria, all those criteria, every 2 years when they have to requalify?
The honest answer is, I mean, if somebody is successful, this program's not designed to keep people from going up in their professional levels. If they get a big raise, if they qualify for, unit number A, and they get a big raise because they promote up, the system's not designed to say, you're now out of your unit. It's like John said, you qualify for your unit the day you move in, and then there's other things that you need to continually qualify for. You need to continually work, you need to continually live in your house for 8 months a year, and you need to continually not own property in the drainage.
So
I think those are the
I
three that
Those
you
are
have.
the three
I knew I forgot one, but
So I see an inherent problem with the housing, with the housing program, and not just this one, most housing programs. And that is that as long as people qualify with employment and generally employment, okay, they stay in their homes, they age. Presuming the economy of the town expands and grows, more people work in town, more people therefore are qualified, and the only way to maintain certain, some level of workforce housing is to continually build more workforce housing. Because older people aren't moving out. And the way we have structured it, once you qualify to get in, you're in for life.
That one unit, not the system, but yeah.
Yep, you're in for life. As long as you work in, as long as you have a job, you're in for life. The growth of the town requires additional employees, which need additional housing. And you just, it's just continues to require more and more housing. And it kind of piggybacks on the problem that we have, or that we recognize with aging in place. That's just another part of the same issue. People age in place, they don't want to leave. They're taking up a unit that's bigger than, perhaps bigger than what they need. And it requires the municipality just to continue to build more and more units. And, it just spirals, it just continues to grow. And I see that as a really a long-term problem. It's a short-term problem today for Snowmass Village, but it's a long-term problem, really, because you can't get it. The system doesn't provide turnover, if you will, in units. Very, very little turnover in
And
units.
let's clarify that you're talking about deed restricted units, not rental units.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm talking about deed
So-
restricted
Yeah,
units.
it's the
Good.
throughput issue. And there is very apparent lack of political will to address the throughput issue. I wouldn't say so by this council, but I would put forth for Roaring Fork, contiguous municipalities and/or counties. And everyone has identified it as an issue, but no one wants to step forward and really lead that cause. I'll be the first to admit, I'm all over this.
When you say throughput, you mean what?
Throughput, there's no place to go. Eagle County went out on the limb and opened a CCRC. Their demographic is 10 years less in terms of need for aging in place than what Roaring Fork Valley is. And what happens? We talk about it, we talk about it, we talk about it. And workforce housing is an issue in Aspen. It's an issue for Snowmass Village that's basically going to be built out before long. Yes, we have a workforce housing project, looks like it's gonna happen down in Basalt, and one down, as you know, in El Jabal. But we've gotta have some political will to address the entire housing issue. From when you get that first studio to, if you will, get into a deed restricted home or property. And on that back end, there is no policy.
Well, and we've done numbers, I mean, so speaking about, I'm gonna blend a little bit between ownership and rental. But when we've crunched numbers for the comp plan, depending on the number, how the assumptions you wanna make, over, I believe it's 20 years, we believe there's a need, pick your adjective, for between 200 to 400 more units. I mean, I could say that number can go up easily if you expanded who you wanted to let in there and all that kind of stuff. But if you're willing to accept between 2 to 4, or even just settle for the lowest, 200, I mean, then it kind of comes to that policy question of, is our policy still to try to aim to house 60% of the, I'm gonna screw it up, but 60% of the employees that work in town? That's the goal we're aiming for. And that number, depending on how you wanna crunch your numbers, demands 200 to 400 more units than we've got right now. And that's what we're working towards, slowly, albeit exceptionally slowly. But I think what we're trying to do is put together ideas and coalitions of folks that wanna help address that, different organizations. And I think that's gonna be, I think I've told the council that that's gonna be one of the bigger issues this comp plan is gonna likely address is that too much? Can we fit them here? How would we fit them? Where would they go? Is that something we wanna be aiming for? That's a big issue.
And, I see some colleagues from the Aspen School District here, but I'll address the other side of that equation, and that's Picken County employees. I personally am very aware of what it's like to hire an employee in the Roaring Fork Valley. There is no affordable housing at all. You're limited on the stock that you have for, whether it's rental in Snowmass Village or Picken County, you can't get in. And all of a sudden, you're gonna make $60,000 or $70,000 a year if you're lucky as a teacher or as a nurse or a paramedic or what have you, and there's no place to live. And at this point, we're doing stuff like bonuses, huge bonuses to get people to come and work for us, but on the back end, there's no housing. So they're living way in Rifle, trying to catch a bus to try to get up here, and it becomes a dissatisfier to want to work in the community because there's no place to go. At the same time, we don't want to deal with the aging in place issue. So, tell you the truth, I think we need to, I don't want to do the regional thing that's been proposed with Myler, that's more Garfield focused, but we need to sit down and talk about what is the real need for our valley, not only Snowmass, but Aspen, Picken County, and really look at a strategy on housing. Because this issue is gonna, whether it's a regulation about you can only make X number of dollars, that's all it's not window dressing, it's the detail, but it's a policy issue of what we wanna do.
The big issue is, do you want more? I mean, and we think we've crunched numbers that can show 200 to 400 more units are needed.
And
And
where
that's,
are we gonna
again,
put them?
I think there's ways to do it, but I think that's the stuff, it's paying for it, and it's the big question is, are we gonna be willing to accept it? I mean, there's 30-something units down a rodeo, that's, 20, I'm sorry,
That's a
20-something.
drop in the
That's a
bucket.
drop in the bucket. There could be units back behind Town Hall, which could be much higher density, and there's other locations that we could certainly
And
talk
last
about.
time we looked at that location up here and ran the budget,
It's
it was
expensive.
ungodly.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt. And I'm talking numbers of units, not numbers of dollars. But if there's a commitment to say, yes, let's make that happen, which is, the council's goal is along the lines of, strategically make it happen, which I interpret as don't be stupid, but try and do the best you can. That's what we're trying to do. And, Phil brought up the point, the FAB looked at this, and so I'm pretty comfortable saying that the number's pretty right, that we net about $1 million a year right now, because we paid off the housing bonds. We're netting about $1 million a year that we could apply towards new projects. It sounds like a lot, and it's something we can start tackling towards, and that's the budget priority. When we're back to the budget discussion, how much do we want to put forward to tackling it? And when we talked about the comp plan, I think there was significant concern that when we showed, where these units could fit, the pushback or, the discussion was, is that just big enough or is that too big? And I think that's that policy stuff that you all need to weigh in on. If there's a throughput issue, then let's say, yeah, we're willing to make it happen, let's go. If there's concerns about paving paradise, which is a legitimate concern, we gotta find that sweet spot. And then, of course, the dollars to make it happen. But I think we're on the same page.
So what I hear you saying, there's really not any way to, I guess there's always a way to game the system, but we have the ability at the very beginning to make sure we get all the appropriate tax documents, whether it's all the schedules of various partnerships and
Yeah.
yada, 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 right?
I don't wanna speak for Terry, when they're qualifying,
Okay,
but
I'm
the
looking at
stack they
Terry to
get
answer
for,
that.
how big's a stack for, when we just put a unit up in the crossings, this last week? I mean, the stack of information is considerable, and then some of it's black and white, and Terry can say yes or no. Sometimes John needs to get called in to review how trusts work, or how we review other kinds of data, but, I mean, it's people's financials, and so, yeah, you can make them as complicated as you want. But we try our best to make sure we're sticking to this, and this is the stuff that we think we need to look at. In addition to other, there might be, you guys might say, you know what, we need to strengthen it up, and, right now, the restrictions say you can't have a second home in the drainage, in the Colorado Crystal and somebody else. Basically, maybe we need,
Glenwood Basic, right?
maybe we need to say, you know what, maybe that needs to be a little broader. Maybe those are the kind of things that we could certainly work with, those are ideas that, what are we trying to achieve? And that's what I'm saying, we know that these need to be updated. There's no doubt that we've got ideas when we're reviewing it, things that, how do you qualify, where does the job count? How do we measure income? Those are all things that we know can be updated, and that's what we're suggesting.
And Terry, do you have a sense of people that you feel like are taking advantage of the system? You think it's 10% or?
I couldn't answer that at all. As far, when I send out the affidavit and they all come back, they all say that they,
Meet the continuing obligations.
So, and they X the wrong box, I'll call them, I said, did you say you own property within the Roaring Fork Valley? And they go, no, it should have been a no, I do not own. But
Right.
as far as I know on that, and the only other way for enforcement is, a complaint basis. I mean, someone would complain on it and put it in writing, and then we follow it up like that, but,
But it's really challenging to get somebody out of their home, right?
yeah.
It depends on the qualification that's assumed not to be hit.
Right.
Right.
I mean, if someone owns a home in the drainage, it's pretty easy to show, here's the deed, here's your name, tell us how you can continue
And
to
did we
qualify.
go to that detail?
We have, certainly, yeah. Since I've been here, certainly.
So
If you
they
get
sign-
a complaint, then you'll look and see if they own
Yeah.
something.
Investigate, right.
But you say they send in an affidavit, sign their name, but there's no supporting documentation accordingly. It's just
At this time, we do not
a
request.
sheet of paper that,
They affirm under the penalties of perjury.
But you do nothing to check on them? No, no, I mean, if somebody wants to cheat, they'll figure out how to cheat and they'll sign a piece of paper, unless somebody yells on them, is what I hear.
Right.
Yep,
And that's the revenue and back to the budget.
yep.
When we get those complaints, we want to make sure that we've got dollars in the budget to look into those issues. Not that we haven't been, but I think we're gonna put a higher emphasis on looking into it and asking people to affirm, no, this is accurate, you know, this is how I'm
No.
doing it.
One of the principles we have, it's even part of our town council rules and what have you, is honesty.
Yeah.
That's what you're asking, is trust and honesty.
Honest-based system, yeah.
So Terry, what do you see some of the biggest challenges you have in your job applying these regs?
Town manager.
No,
And the attorney,
no. No, I mean,
council's third on
I was like, what else you
Could be
got besides
first, that could
that?
no, I think determining the home office business, that can be the biggest challenge of what I'm seeing right now. Self-employment. That is a very big challenge for me this time.
You have to work the 1,400 hours, and if someone's working out of their house, does that qualify to the end need? And those are, with the way the economy's changing, that happens more and more than it used to, and it's getting tougher and tougher to identify that.
And of those 1,400 hours, 80% of your revenue has to be generated in Snowmass, right?
Correct.
at initial
Right.
qualification.
Oh, an initial qualification.
That's to get the Snowmass Village priority. I'm employed in Snowmass Village, and there's a priority for people employed in the village over county employees who can still apply. But then, after you've qualified, your income has to come from Pickens County. So, you have to be employed in Pickens County, or you're employed, and it's not, anyway.
But that's a tougher one, it's getting grayer, and that's the one we know we gotta kind of straighten up a little bit so we can explain it as clear as black and white as we can.
Because should the taxpayers and the citizens of Snowmass Village subsidize someone who does their work in their unit that's subsidized, but all their work is benefiting another geographic location?
I think it's a big thing. There's a lot of people, I mean, anyone that
There's
needs a
some.
consultant or,
Right. But those are things that need to be updated with the changes in the global economy.
right,
And those are gonna be policy questions that are gonna land right on your desk, because you can argue it both ways. There's pros and cons on both sides. But those are the kind of things that we hope to identify and say, here's, you know, however many issues, and then you guys are gonna have some tough decisions.
So, working out of your home is one, and I can see that. We all know some people that are doing consultant and a variety of businesses, working out of their home, incomes earned outside of Snowmass Village. They may have one or two clients within the town, but that's pretty rare. What's the second?
Pickens County, not just.
Pickens County, yeah. Other things that you see, Terry?
As far as qualifying,
Yeah.
I have one. Changes in family status. So we have qualification for minimum occupancy. And when family status changes, occupancy can change whereby the program is not housing at the efficiency that it was designed for.
Oh.
Well, as that comes along to the aging in place conversation.
That's part of it.
That is part of it.
And I don't really,
You might not have thought about that as
no,
being part of it.
I've thought about it, but to me, that's a different thing than what I was trying to outline.
Yeah, I thought.
Okay, because we'll have a family that is 4 people and they're in a 4-bedroom place, and then there's a change in the marital status and there's one person living in that same place.
And they can rent that unit?
Some places, no, some places can rent a bedroom, but usually, it's no more than a bedroom anywhere, right?
And they have to live there a certain
They have
amount of
to live
time.
there.
The person that owns it has to live
Live
there.
there.
Right.
Like, it was like, what was it,
8 months,
That's 8
Or
months.
something like that.
There's a lot of permutations you can get into.
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah. Terry, I don't know how you do your job.
Well,
Try my best.
I mean, Terry and Joe have beat it into me since my first day. It's people's homes, and that's what makes it tough. I mean, there's a lot of regulations, there's a lot of black and white, but when it comes down to it, it's someone's home. And that's where we try and find the compassion, and we try and find the regulation, and it's, sometimes we hit it, and sometimes we veer a little one way or the other.
I mean, the biggest thing I noticed recently, and especially in the one issue we have with, one of the people that was going through the appeals process, it didn't seem to me that the appeals process was very clear. Like, there's one paragraph on it, and it's sort of just open-ended. I mean, I think there needs to be more of a defined process, because it seems that we might be getting into more of this, given, what we just talked about, and the process doesn't really seem that developed to me. And maybe that's the way it is, but I don't know. I mean, if I was going through an appeal process, like, I would want to be able to look at a manual and know what the different requirements are going to be, and deadlines, like, how many days from the initial notification to the time that you have to respond, how many days does the town have to respond back to you? I mean, I know that there's extenuating circumstances and there might be different things going on, but I think there needs to be more of a detailed process, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree with you more, and this is the first one.
Right.
In the past, there's probably been, in my years, I'm gonna say somewhere between 7 and 12. And when confronted with the results of the investigation, they voluntarily relinquished the units.
Right.
It's different now. That's why
Right.
the item is in your budget, and it's why we're asking you to work it. We've, I guess we've come to the end of the useful life of this set of regulations. So we need policy decisions, and, the regulatory scheme that you're referring to is an absolute.
Right. I mean, I don't know. I think that there needs to be more of a process, and that's one of the things, if we're gonna spend the time redoing it, one of the things I think we should focus on. I mean, the other one is this idea of, I realize that Pickens County employees are on the tier, but they're on the last tier, and there's certain essential services that are provided to this community. We do not have a school in this community. Our school happens to have the 81611 zip code.
And we don't have our hospital employees.
Right. And, that's just, Snowmass can't house a school and house a hospital, and so that's what we use. And to not give those people greater priority in our housing lottery, to me, doesn't seem right.
And that's the kind of policy stuff that's gonna come before you, and,
Yep.
and just so you don't get surprised, then that's gonna take that 200 to 400 number and increase it. And that's when you're going through the comp plan, and you get pushback on, oh my gosh, we're building too many houses here, how are we ever gonna do this? Which we've heard loud and clear from some folks, I'm not saying the majority,
Right.
but, that's just some stuff that needs to be considered in total, and I'm all for it. It doesn't,
I mean, there's people in this town that feel we should not add one more employee housing unit.
yes. And that's the political stuff, that's why you
Yep.
guys get elected, and those are just some of the outcomes of if we change that.
But I think there's more people in this town that say we need more employee housing.
I totally agree with you, but there's a strong and growing contingent.
Right. Especially because the gap between free market and deed-restricted
It's
housing is
increased.
just getting greater.
It's bigger and bigger and bigger, and we all need employees.
Yeah.
And, when you're talking about schools and you're talking about teachers and you want to retain them, you don't want them coming here for a year or two and leaving. You want them to stay, and you want to provide good public education. You can't do that if we don't offer
I can
housing.
echo that,
And the same, in Markey's field.
Yep, it's a 2-year turnover, that's it, they're out of here.
And not to
They
get in
can't
the weeds
afford
on it, but we've talked with the school district, and if that were to change, they've we could combine resources and do projects at that point.
Right, and
the
I
i-
think
And
that's
the idea
great.
that we've talked about, and I'm not sure it's been bought off on, and I saw Susan behind me, but, I mean, we could keep the regulations for the exact set we've got now, and as we grow the pie, as we grow more units, then those are the units that we could potentially have different regulations on, and say, hey, let's share these costs, let's get these things happen, if we're gonna build more, let's put these new regulations on these new units. I mean, there's a lot of things that we could talk about, but we need to have these regulations updated first. And another one we've talked about, I know in this room, is when you're moving from a larger unit, a 5-bedroom house or a 4-bedroom house, kids move out, do we change this prioritization to say it's not just years worked, but if you're going from a 4-bedroom to a 2-bedroom, and you're gonna free up your 4,
I guess.
should that get a higher priority in a duplex rather than in complex? There's a lot of these ideas that have been kicked around.
Right.
Well,
This will be that opportunity.
not only should the priority change, but should the net income and net worth change? Because now you got a person who's 65 years old, who's had a whole lifetime to build up some net worth, and you can't tell them that, I'm sorry, you wanna go into a smaller unit, but you've got too much net worth. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no,
Well, they're gonna stay in the big unit.
Yes,
Well, they will.
duh.
and those are the things, if the goal is to free up the big unit, then how do we make that happen? And those are really good examples of things we think need to be addressed with this.
Right.
So,
But you can also go back to the very beginning that Bob brought up. Growth drives the need.
yep,
You shut off the growth, maybe you can get to satisfying the need.
Well,
Sorry, that's way up there, and I know it's not gonna fly. But
but I mean,
well, you have to throw it out there.
it's part of the
it
equation.
is part of the problem.
I'm not gonna say it's part of the problem, because
Well, because there's a solution. I get it. All right.
part of the equation. I didn't say solution or,
Okay.
But
Fancy
even
math.
but even at total build-out, I mean, we're still gonna have a need for employee housing. I mean,
Well, there's always gonna be a need.
There will be if we don't do something on the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, we don't.
well,
if we-
right, I
if we
mean, but
don't
just
offer
for the
some
sake of
options.
argument, then you're just shifting one person from one.
There is a piece of property that is available that maybe we as Snowmass Village need to go purchase. And it's outside the urban boundary for Pitkin County. And it's on a bus route. RAFTA doesn't really stop there, but there is a piece of property that has some significant land. Just saying, guys.
the town-owned land doesn't exactly meet that, but very close. So, on the far side of Wildcat, there's an employee parcel.
That's very true. So,
And the town also enjoys the power of eminent domain. But the fair market value scare you away every time.
So, I mean, if I'm hearing it right, I mean, the goal is, when we go through this, is to make sure, well, we'll bring forward a number of proposals, ideas, concepts. You'll see the pros and cons. And it's meeting that council goal that you guys said a year ago, or, 9 months ago, whatever it was, to strategically enhance the number of units and to keep taking those steps. The one we've got lined up now is rodeo. We think we can get that up and going. It's a drop in the bucket, I agree, but at least gets the momentum in the right direction. And then there's a number of other regulations that we think we can address to hopefully make some improvements.
and I'm gonna ask you, Clint, what's it gonna take to bring the city of Aspen, elected officials, and Pitkin County to the table to talk about aging in place?
I would defer to the elected officials to tell me that answer. I don't know. I mean, I can tell you the price of asphalt. I can tell you the cost per square foot of something. I can answer the math. That is a political one that I don't know that answer, Madam Mayor. I don't. I'm
So we
sorry.
have elected transportation, why can't we have elected housing?
I think that's what Myler's advocating.
Well, more so for Garfield County, but,
I think
yes,
so.
I don't know,
He wants
guys.
it to be multi-jurisdictional, and I think that the city, APSHA, has already said no,
That's very true, they've already said no.
and I don't know what your final decision was, other than you heard the proposal and we haven't brought it.
We said no, we would be willing to participate in some discussions, but not at the table.
I mean, should we also be exploring incentives to encourage people to move out of employee housing? I mean, if some people are looking for a bridge, to leave. Maybe they need that,
Cash,
yeah, or whatever it is.
buy them out.
Make me an offer.
Right.
What would be that dollar
I mean,
amount it could be?
Without knowing what that looks like, I mean, I think that's, the regulations are, I mean, there's concern that the regulations are preventing something wise from happening. We want to make sure the regulations aren't preventing something wise. If there's something creative, then we can plug that in too. I don't know what I can't visualize what that incentive would be to get out. But if there's something, that's great, let's talk about it. This is that chance to make those things
Well,
happen.
how did we do, just on your point, way back when we were buying people out where we had mixed housing complexes down at,
And we still do that. We
Yeah.
did this last year.
we buy people out.
Right, so we buy, when the unit goes up, the deed restriction comes up, the town, rather than putting it in the lottery, we buy it. And then we own 3 of those
Sell
units now. And so we actually have town employees in those units, but at some point, we would anticipate taking the deed restriction off those because of the way they operate, and then selling them.
Okay.
And we don't wanna lose the units, this is my own opinion, and that's, once we have a project to replace them with, that's the time to sell them, but in the meantime, we're continuing to operate them.
That is your opinion.
That is my opinion.
That's your opinion.
That is my managerial opinion, not my legal opinion. I will confer the legal opinion over there, but that's my managerial opinion.
The legal opinion, I don't wanna say diametrically opposed, but certainly isn't in line with that.
Or neither was previous
Shocker,
councils.
we disagree.
So
And the
Clint,
previous council was that way too, but this council chose the method of retaining ownership.
Clint, so we have this project, Rodeo Place. It's in the
Hopper.
It's in the hopper, it's in the stream. If in fact we are going to do a revision of these regulations, shouldn't we have them, wouldn't it be advantageous to have that revision done before we start offering
Yes.
these units in Rodeo Place?
Yes.
So can we expect that the timeline will work so that we'll have a chance to do these before
Yes,
we really get into the Rodeo Place
Yes.
priority?
that's our goal.
Second part of that question. We had a task force that worked on these regs.
6 or 8 years ago.
I was gonna say, that Rick
Yeah.
Griffin,
We had an ad hoc committee.
ad hoc, that's right.
Advisory, yeah.
I'll ask you, was that helpful or not helpful? I wasn't there. You were there.
Yes, I was there. Yeah, it came up with the different tiers on the lottery system, and there were some results out of that.
Can I be honest? I've been told it made staff's work a lot. It made it very difficult because we were managing a committee at that point. If we could come up with some proposals, then I think we can put that out, let everybody weigh in on them. But to work through the committee process to come up with the proposals,
That was tough.
I mean, it was,
It was very tough. It was very lengthy. It was somewhat productive and unproductive and
we're all for the input.
challenging and gray hairs, right?
And in certain ways, self-serving.
Very true.
So I don't want to preclude any kind of input on it, but I think if we can come up with some proposals, then it gives folks a chance for something to comment on, rather than developing the proposals and then commenting later on. So that, if you're comfortable, our goal would be to say, let's start here, see what we can come up with, and then if other people have other ideas, then we can incorporate them or not, and give you guys something to think about at that point. But we'd like to kind of give you a chance, or give you something to think about, rather than getting everybody lined up, getting a bunch of input, trying to get 10 people to work together to agree on the input, and then get it to you to get more input. We'd like to give you a proposal to get input on.
That would make sense, and within that proposal, I see the school board people, the hospital's not here, and other people, but I think we have to
RAFTA,
listen.
I mean,
Yeah.
lots of
There's
folks
a
have asked for
lot
that.
of opportunities, and I will take it upon myself to explore that other issue I keep bringing up, okay?
And what is our time frame on rodeo place?
You know, I can't sit here and tell you that. I mean, 2 months ago, the goal was to have, design drawings done by the end of the year. We put out an RFP for architects. We've got finalists, and in all honesty, I haven't pulled the trigger on hiring a finalist to get the ball rolling, for some operations reasons. And so I can't tell you, is my short answer. It's not as fast as I'd hoped, but I think we've got some legitimate reasons to kind of slow it down a little bit and make sure when we do it right.
So you don't anticipate these coming online this next summer?
Oh,
Construction
no,
to start?
I mean, if everything lined up perfectly, the earliest we do is start construction next summer. If everything had been operating and going as per plan, construction would start in the summer of 18. That was the hope. That's what I'm not sure we can hit anymore. But, and honestly, I don't have a real great answer for you right now. There's some things I need some feedback on, and I don't have a really great answer for you.
Okay, anything else relative to housing? Terry, you're doing a fantastic job.
She's doing great.
Do people say thank you?
I appreciate you saying thank you.
Honest to God.
Sometimes I hear it.
But
You
no,
do.
when I
These
when I
guys
talk
do.
to some of our employees that deal with the housing office, they do praise the work that you and your staff do.
Thank you, appreciate it. Thanks for your support too, because we all know it's very important, housing for our workforce, for sure.
That's very important, and the renovations that have taken place have been great.
Yeah.
Has the feedback been positive?
Very much so.
Very,
and
very positive.
Energy efficiency has been a really big plus on that too.
Good.
So Susan, Dwayne, I see you in the back of the room. Did you have any comments?
Very happy.
You're happy, you're just listening? We're so glad that you came.
No, we're happy to hear that, there's some ways maybe we can work together.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very, very much for coming. And now, we're gonna turn our attention, is everybody done with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so,
Talk about sister cities.
Sister Cities. As you know, this time last year, I had the opportunity to participate in our Sister Cities 50th anniversary trip over to Garmisch-Partenkirchen, and then over to Chamonix. And for anyone's information, I paid the whole thing out of my pocket, just to be clear, because I've had that question asked. And it was a wonderful trip. And then, as you know, we had, I think it was Nancy and Wolf came and did the presentation on Sister Cities. This has been an issue that has been discussed on and off town council for a period of time, to the point, at one point, we looked at doing our own Sister City project ourselves, back when John was on council, John W., not John Dresser.
John Wilkinson.
Yes, and we chose not to move forward with doing that because Sister Cities is not just a nice thing to do in any community. It's a worldwide organization. Sister Cities is. You have to do an application to become a sister city, and it's a lot of red tape, and it's an honor to be designated as a sister city. As we all know, there was a death recently, or last year in January, for the person that was a chair of the board. And he has passed, and there is now new leadership within the board for Aspen Sister Cities. I have gone to several of their meetings, and tomorrow night they've asked us to come forward with what we would like to see in a relationship and vice versa about what we would be willing to support Sister Cities with. And we currently do a grant for Sister Cities. I don't remember what the amount is.
$2,500.
$2,500. We all know it's a great program. And I'm going just to take some notes. It could go as far as a board. I've asked for a board seat before, and that might be a possibility. Another would be the opportunity for them to change the name to Aspen's Snowmass is not as simple as just asking and the board approving it has to go to, you know, the big international, blah, blah, blah. Is there any interest of any relationship, and how might we participate and provide more support or various experiences in Snowmass? So I'm open.
So the idea of trying to have a sister city from Snowmass, dedicated to Snowmass, would be difficult because Snowmass would have to go through this process.
Yes.
Are there many people on the, involved in the Aspen
Oh,
Sister
yeah, there
City from
is.
here?
There's no one on the board, well, wait a minute, the Ginches are very involved.
Okay,
And as we know, Nancy and Wolf are the contact, the relationship with Garmisch because of the years that Wolf lived in Garmisch and was part of the ski patrol over there. And Nancy was in Garmisch as an ambassador back during the war. Anyway, that's immaterial.
well, it isn't, I mean.
It is. No other people, you know, people participate. They host families for the 2 weeks that the kids are here. And you know, we've got, I think it's 7 different sister cities. It could be 8, I lose count.
So there's a bunch of them.
There's a ton of them. Trying to think of Abitone, that's a relatively new one. Garmisch part, huh? Bariloche.
Shimakapu.
Chamonix. Another one in France.
Oh, what about the Japanese? Isn't
Shimakapu.
Shimakapu. There's one in France, no, Switzerland, France.
Davos.
Starts with a Davos.
I think they let Davos go for.
No, they still have it. They didn't totally let it go.
Chamonix.
They're not supporting it right now, sending kids there. We have the one in Venezuela, not Venezuela, Australia. How about, come on, Butler. Australia. I think those are the big ones.
Oh, Queenstown, New Zealand.
Yeah, Queenstown, New Zealand, not Australia.
Mhm.
So any thoughts?
Are there kids, I mean,
They're high school kids.
yeah, but are kids from Snowmass participating
Oh, yeah.
in these things?
Yeah,
It's true.
Rhonda's daughter went to,
She went to Bariloche.
yeah. To
so
go
did
what-
you have any thoughts, Rhonda, because you've been a participant?
Well, I know that the sister cities, I mean, there's, Snowmass participates, and we had someone stay in our house, so it's not just a total Aspen thing, because our kids do go to school there, so kids are placed in both Snowmass and Aspen.
And we
I know
could,
lots of people that have
and we
participated.
could probably do more in terms of that participation, because probably no one, I don't know how many of you knew that Garmisch is coming in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
But those kids are lined up through kids going there, right?
Kids in the past have not, there's a whole story in terms of that relationship. All the towns are somewhat different. Our goal is to get kids to, they select which one of the communities they want to go to. And Bariloche has been pretty popular. And Garmisch, this is the first time our kids have gone to Garmisch for a number of years.
Chamonix was a little bit off, I don't want to say off and on, but years that the Aspen kids went and they didn't come, and then, and then years that Chamonix said, we can't host you after they'd already booked, so they went to Paris. But
Yeah, there's a whole, it really gets into the whole relationship with their sister city and who is the sponsor and who's leading it.
well, and as the years go by too, on both sides, there's,
Yes,
you know,
wax and
the demographics change and the interests change with the demographics, so.
well, the first is, are you a believer in the program and think it's a great idea for ambassadorial relationships at a young age across,
Well, it's another opportunity. I mean, obviously Rotary does a lot of
yeah, we do a lot.
ambassadorial relationships, and Snowmass Rotary and Aspen Rotary both do it,
Mhm.
right?
Right,
In
right.
both directions.
Snowmass Rotary has not hosted a student now on the exchange program, which we're obligated to every other year.
Yeah.
We haven't done one since I did my last one with John Peacock.
I guess I understood in the last year or so, one of the last two, that there was difficulty in finding
I can't find host families,
host families.
host families.
How long is it for?
That one's 9 months.
I was gonna say, the Rotary one's much
Not-
longer than the
It's
sister
9
city.
months. It's all during the school year. They come in August and they leave in basically June.
But that's two different programs.
It's 2 different programs.
Rotary program is an exchange program. I've personally hosted through that.
Would you like to do it again?
Would, I loved it. I didn't know you were looking.
It's a lot of fun.
But that's Rotary, but you're,
Yeah.
This is,
it's 3 months. You get one
yeah,
3 months.
three months.
But yeah, that's,
Yeah,
as
that's
a
enough.
side story, a kid from India and a kid from Spain, fantastic family experience. I can tell you, it was awesome. Wouldn't give it up. But, and then I've had a kid do the sister city, and it's fantastic. I mean, 2 weeks there, 2 weeks here, the exchange.
It's not that big a
great.
deal.
It's very different, but you're asking about sister city, not Rotary. It's just,
This is Sister
I just
City.
made the point, I
Yeah.
just was confirming what I thought.
Yeah, that's correct.
It's another ambassadorial program.
yeah.
So if
And so
we're,
the town, so in 16, I'm reading my notes, in 2016, the council just allocated $2,500 to the program. And the direction at that point was that sister cities needed to apply through the grant, through our grant
Right.
program in 17. In 17, they were awarded $2,500. And so we would give that same direction in 18, that they need to apply through the grant program for those dollars.
so I'm asking, would we like to perhaps sit at the table?
What are they asking for some help?
They're asking for ideas.
Ideas?
How would, they want Snowmass to be as much a participant as we possibly desire to be.
Mhm.
So I think the way you begin a relationship is, for example, if it's a rodeo night, we take the kids to the rodeo. Ski-Co does help in providing skis and some lift tickets, and perhaps the town puts on a spaghetti dinner. I'm just, those types of things. The other thing that we might want to think about is inviting to a council meeting. When I was in Garmisch, we went to government meetings. It was kind of cool, a little reception, a little meeting stuff. That was really, really neat. And I'm thinking those types of things, so those, doesn't cost us a lot as a town.
Those kinds of things
Those are
nice.
easy to do.
Yes.
And then we to build that relationship and right now, I'd probably say we'd be an ex officio at the board table and attend their monthly meetings, which are the second Tuesday of every month. But I'm not gonna ask for something like that if you all don't wanna be a part of it. And just leave it as is. I don't know. I'd love to be at the table. I think our town needs to be at the table.
I just don't know enough about it to say whether we should be at the table or not at the table. But on the other hand, if we take a position ex officio, and it's how you get to know more about
Mhm.
what the organization does, and if we can build more, and if there becomes more public interest, we can do further.
Yeah, the goal, the only way that, was my thinking, we build the relationship, our desire and our outreach to the board is, our goal is to build a bridge of relationship with Aspen Sister Cities.
Mhm.
And
No, I think it's an important program.
Yeah.
I think we should be involved.
I even-
We should have a seat at the table.
And I mean, I would throw out that if we're ex officio, that maybe a different, one of us goes each month,
Yeah,
just to go and listen and hear and meet the people, and
anybody,
eventually, we all get to have some kind of a relationship instead of one person.
yeah, because I would not volunteer, I'd love to do it,
Well,
but it's
yeah.
not, it's the time commitment to
Mhm.
really do something and give it 100%.
Mhm.
I would see, if you will, a younger person.
That
I'm
leaves
happy
me
to-
out.
Well, lucky for you. I'm a younger person.
I'm so glad our demographics are so good. But no, I think it's just,
I think it's great.
it's so invaluable. It's such an invaluable
It
experience.
is. I
for
mean,
the
and
town.
the fact that, we are sending kids from Snowmass to these places, and they're coming here, and to be able to do something simple like have them here and have a little reception, I think it's great. I think,
So you're in?
you know, I know, Bob, you don't know as much, but, you know, Bill having, you know, kids in the school and gone through it, and me about to, so, you know, and Clint's hosted, so,
And Rhonda's gone through
and
it?
Rhonda's gone through it.
Yeah, I mean,
think-
obviously, just in this room, there are a number of
Yeah.
people who have
I mean,
participated.
I don't think we have anything to lose.
We have nothing to lose,
No.
we have everything to gain.
No,
We're
Okay,
in.
we're in,
I'm in.
okay.
We're in.
It's
We're
5
in.
to 6.
I'm in.
Of course,
Listen,
you
I can
can't take a
payment.
vote, you're just taking direction from your
I'm
fellow.
just taking, you know, I'm just asking.
Oh, I'll go to a meeting. Yeah, I like to see what
It's
it's all
fun to
about.
go to those
That's good.
meetings.
I mean, just to your point, I mean, I think just being there, you can offer a different perspective. I mean, oftentimes my place on the Nordic Council, I mean, I'm just kind of there observing to what's going on, but when it comes to Snowmass and the golf course, like this year, I think we have a really good plan going forward. And it's not that I brought the ideas, but at least I had a voice at the table.
So it's, okay, I'll do that tomorrow evening, and any other things for work session tonight? Any other thing coming forward?
You can hit your 6 o'clock goal. See you at
Thank
9:30
God,
on
because
Friday.
last week was a real doozy.
Yeah, sure was.
Huh?
Yeah.
It was a long
Meeting. There's some tired people around here.
But we got it all done.
Yes, we did.
We don't have the delivery done yet. No, by the way, thank you for a wonderful town dinner.
Yeah, the boards and commission dinner was
That was-
awesome.
Sorry I missed it.
It was a much smaller group this year, but very
Sorry I
nice.
missed it.
It was good, and
Barbara did all the work.
and we all showed up,
It's fun. It was a great time.
so thank you, thank you.
And that, back to the budget, that's in your budget for next year, so
Yeah.
we'll continue it forward.
So we may need to figure out a better date or something. It seemed like a lot of people were out of town.
Yeah,
Maybe
you know,
day
last
of
year we
the
did it end of September, and we kind of got some pushback because it was against, I think, Balloon Weekend, and so we kind of pushed it back to October. I mean,
Right.
we're always looking for that, we always kind of aim for the end of September, beginning of October, and where that magic spot is. Sometimes it depends on when the mayor's around. So there's not a lot of magic to it. There's not a lot of science to it. It's
Right.
best guess. I think last year,
Off-season.
remember we had 55, this year we had 48 or something like that.
Oh, is that the only difference? Oh, I thought it was much bigger last
I
year.
don't think you're ever
I
gonna.
don't think it was a huge difference, it was
It's
10%
off-season.
maybe, but
Oh,
it's
okay.
enough that we try and find that weekend.
Oh, I thought it was like, we had 70 some last year, and,
No, maybe the year before. I don't remember.
Yeah.
yeah, anyway,
I've
We,
slept
we try and find it so it makes everybody happy and
right.
show up.
Okey-dokey, all good stuff.
Cool.
Okay,
Thank you, thank you,
thank you.
thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everybody. Adjourned.
Thanks for
We're
sitting in the
adjourned, and you
audience.
can turn us off.
It depends on Joe.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
I don't have a really good answer. I'm weeks away from knowing something. I saw him today. I went to his house today, and he's weeks away from knowing anything. So I don't know.